Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started with our next session. And I think as important as getting registered with the city is making sure you have proper insurance coverage, because if you do, nothing will go wrong. If you don't, something will go wrong and you wish you had, I think is the general premise we'll use. So it is my pleasure to introduce Chad Conkle with Conkle Insurance. And you are, I don't want to say relatively new to the downtown, but you just shifted down a couple blocks down on Main Street.
32 South Main.
Yes, 32 South Main. And he has graciously come and offered to give us some do's, don'ts, advice on event insurance, because it is super important. Again, it's one of the things the city's going to require you to do, and some people don't find out about it until then, and then you can be too late to get the kind of coverage you need. So my great pleasure to introduce Chad. And you can even just tell us a little bit. He's got the most adorable family in the entire world, so you can share a little bit about yourself too.
Thank you, Christine. So like she introduced, I'm Chad from Conkle Insurance. We have an office on Main Street. I've been in the insurance industry about 10 years now. I primarily do commercial insurance, so I work a lot with a lot of different businesses. I do a little bit of personal insurance also, but I really like the commercial world, doing events, working with local businesses. That's where the fun's at. Shelley did touch base a little bit in the previous one about city requirements for insurance. I'll go in a little more in depth, different types of coverages, things you should look for. Really what it comes down to is the types of event you're holding, what you ultimately need, just to make sure you got the right coverage for not only the attendees, but yourself as the event host, and then also any entertainment, food trucks, anybody that's on that property with you. So why buy event insurance? Pretty self-explanatory. That liability policy protects you as the host of the event for any liability claims that may be brought against you or the venue that you're hosting it at. Most venues, again, as Shelley talked about, the city is going to require you to provide a certificate of insurance. We'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. One, just making sure that you have the proper coverage that meets their requirements. Each venue also, when you're planning, and we'll get into it a little bit more, are going to require you to have certain requirements. So it's not kind of a one-size-fits-all. Different events require different limits. Different venues have their own recommendations or requirements on what you should ultimately have. This is an example of a certificate of insurance that you would get when you purchase that insurance policy. So the venue, a lot of times, at the time of booking, they should be asking for this certificate just to make sure that you have the proper coverage in place. Just to kind of go over it, up at the top corner, it's going to list who ultimately is insured, whether that would be yourself as the event host, or if it's a reoccurring event, an organization of any sort. Down below is where they're going to list your policy limits. Now, those requirements are going to come from the venue or wherever you're holding that event at. Again, it's very, you definitely want to make sure that the policy that you have matches up to the requirements that the venue has. The last thing you want to deal with is not having those requirements met when your event's coming or planning. It's just things that are going to slow down and kind of make it tough. Down at the bottom, there can be specific wording that wherever you're hosting the event at would require, such as being additionally insured on your policy. It's kind of a fancy way of saying that, yes, we have our own insurance, but if anything happens, your insurance is going to be first. We're covered under your policy. So the city of Janesville, whenever you host an event, they say we need to be named additional insured on your insurance. That basically allows them to be covered under your policy first before their insurance would go into effect. So it's kind of just, I mean, you're the event host. You definitely just want to make sure everything's covered. Down at the bottom, you can also have locations, certain parks. If they require you to list locations, anything can be put on there. The certificate would come from the insurance company. If you're working with an agent, such as myself, I work closely with whoever is requesting that certificate just to make sure everything's perfect. So if you're going and buying insurance online, it might be a little harder to get a certificate made out specifically for a certain event, as opposed to going and working with somebody face to face. It's a little bit easier.
Chad,
Yeah.
just for city events, Chad explained it exactly. What we would require under event description is the exact name and the location of the event. So, Rock Aqua J's Mercury Invite in Trexler Park would be the description, and then the date. The date's really important as well. And then this, and under the certificate holder is City of Janesville.
Perfect. Thank you, Shelley. This is a big one. How soon should you think about purchasing the insurance? I would say when you're pre-planning, when you know what type of event, start working with an agent somewhere just to get an idea, because there are so many different factors that can ultimately impact the total cost of that policy. And again, it's the last thing you want to do is to find out how much it could be extraordinary. I mean, if you have 10,000 people at this event as opposed to a birthday party with 30, I mean, there's a huge difference between them. So the sooner you're thinking about starting that process, the better off you're going to be. And again, most places are going to want that proof of insurance right away. So just be prepared going into it. And a couple of other factors, obviously the number of attendees. Is there going to be alcohol served on premise? Shelley talked a little bit about making sure that if there is, licensed bartenders, all of those things are questions on an application for that event insurance also. And ultimately the type of event that's being held, whether it's a birthday party, a sporting event, there's so many different factors that go into that policy on the total cost of it. The sooner the better is really what the answer is. These are different types of coverages that are available. A lot of them are built into a standard policy. Some of them have fancy wording with them, like the first one, that accident medical expense. If somebody at your event trips, happens to get hurt or injured, you could be liable for that injury. So making sure that policy has coverage for that in there. It's pretty tough to get one that doesn't have that. It's the standard liability policy. The next ones are really big. It actually happens quite a bit, that care, custody, or control liability. Not so much at outdoor, but if you're renting somewhere like the venue, for instance, where there's a lot of nice furnishings inside, this example talks about a bottle of red wine that was spilled on an expensive rug. Now, you're going to be liable for those damages if it was one of your guests that happened, and that venue or wherever that event's being held at could ultimately come back on you for that to repair the damages. Now, standard insurance policy would help out with that, so just making sure that coverage is there. The damage to the premise, that's another one. Candle tipped over, lit a tablecloth on fire, and a fire spreads. It's a pretty standard. It's really big. Just making sure that that's in that policy. Event cancellation for outdoor ones. This is something that does not come standard. You can add it on. Anything that's weather related. If you have entertainment that's hired, if you have food trucks that are coming, all of that. There's coverage that's available to help recoup costs. If you're buying drinks or food or anything that's going to go bad due to like a weather-related or a keynote speaker that didn't show up and they were supposed to and you had to cancel the event. There's so many different things that you can do to tailor that policy for exactly what you need. Ultimately, just working closely with somebody that can help work through all those different options to make sure it's set up right. Couple of things to consider. Obviously, if you're hiring entertainment, Flannel Fest is a good example. They have axe throwing down there. Making sure people that are coming to your venue has their own insurance also, because they're not going to be covered under your policy, especially if they're having or handling their own attendees, in their own booth of that sort. Same thing goes with any music. They should ultimately have their own policy also. The next two, food service, that one's kind of a hit or miss one. There's questions on certain applications if you're going to be purchasing food and you're looking for like the event cancellation coverage for food spoilage of that sort. The insurance company is going to want to make sure you can adequately handle, food storage, proper handling, so there's no contamination, or you're bringing, raw meat somewhere where you don't have a cooler or anything to keep it like chilled enough. Things of that sort. The next two, Security and crowd control, as your event grows, that's a really big one. You want to make sure you have things in place to protect your guests while they're there. Flannel Fest did a great job this year. They had people walking around, keeping crowd in order, just making sure everything goes smoothly. As your event grows, this one's a big one. If it's an annually reoccurring event, it may start off small. The next year, it may triple in size. That policy you started with is not going to work as that event grows. Making sure, again, you work closely with whoever you purchase that insurance from to talk about things that change, to make sure that the number of attendees are covered, because again, there's a big difference between having 30 people and 5,000 people. It's a different policy setup, and ultimately the cost is going to be a little different there. I think that might be. Does anybody have any questions on anything I could answer? I don't. If you like, take a picture. That's essentially that's my card there. I thought about bringing them, but at the end of the day, just make sure you're planning ahead. Insurance is never fun to deal with. It's just something that's a requirement in a lot of places, and just making sure it's done right. Yeah.
And the policy just lasts for a certain period of temporary time?
So there's different ways you can set it up. They can be purchased for a few days, or it can be purchased for a year. If you're going to be holding, 6 events throughout the year under the same organization, you can definitely purchase like an annual policy for that. If it's going to be like a one-day event, you can have coverage for one day. If you need a day to set up, a day to tear down, it can be a 3-day policy. You can definitely tailor it to exactly what you need. It's just a matter of, pre-planning and making sure everything's lined up.
I do travel food truck, but I also event plan. And so during my invoice or contract, I'll offer additional for their event. So for example, if they want a truck on site, there's an additional contract that I enclose to ask them, would you like additional outside of mine? Because I don't necessarily cover your area, or
right.
if it's at your home, it's a private event, for example.
Right.
Does your company do that?
We could definitely help. Yeah, definitely. Yep.
I have mine with the truck, but if it's a private event, in my contract it states, I'm responsible for my truck space.
Right.
I'm not responsible. And I don't think a lot of people get it, so I explain that part to them. And then there's a box where it says, would you like additional coverage? So then I come to you and say, hey, I have one day event or a 2-day event. Are you able to do ABC?
Definitely can. Yep.
Okay.
To something like that, it would be, if you're there for one day, it's going to be a single day policy for that, just to make sure your liability is covered. Yeah.
I work with one particularly now, but I like to work with more than one just in case the price is extremely different.
Absolutely. Yep. And we're an independent agency, so I'm not captive to one insurance company. I have 12 different ones that we work with. So.
Okay. But that's what I'm running into where
Awesome.
the one company that I've been doing with this with for a couple of years is now like a little limited, and I'm like, I don't like those.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to give my customer choices in the insurance that they're picking, and then I want to be able to explain to them, well, this covers, me in this area, not your guest over here.
Right. It's a good question. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Anybody else? I think that's it. Thank you guys for listening about insurance for a little bit.
I'm going to hold you captive, but let's get ready around.
Thank you.